Wow, you've made it to part 4. If you've been following along since part 1, congratulations, you're officially a Feathermaster. We don't have a prize for you, but if anyone asks, feel free to call yourself one. Part 4 is all about creating terrain and building the environment, bringing the artwork closer to completion. This part is more freeform and creative, so there's less to stress over. Okay, let's get started. Let's build the background terrain based on the composition we planned earlier. There are two main approaches to creating terrain: vertical and horizontal. Drawing terrain vertically is great for shaping the silhouette of the scene when viewed from the thumbnail composition. Drawing horizontally, on the other hand, is great for adding fine texture details. Let's start with the horizontal approach. To create a rough, uneven terrain, use a large brush and draw short, dense strokes. Just go with the flow and experiment freely. In most cases, pure black can stand out too much. Instead, adjust the color slightly and use a very dark navy for a more natural look. Now let's move on to the vertical terrain. By layering both horizontal and vertical elements, you can create a more dimensional and structured composition. Once you've created larger terrain shapes, break them down into smaller pieces and reuse them. Copy, transform, rotate, and move these smaller chunks to build out the rest of the environment. Floating rocks in the deep sea can add a mystical atmosphere. If any rocks feel too large, simply erase parts of them. It's almost like sculpting, and the process can be quite fun. Trim and reshape any unnecessary parts around the creature to refine the terrain's form. Once the overall shape is set, refer back to the original composition sketch and adjust the position of each rock to fit the scene. The 3D joystick will be a huge help here. Since it moves objects along the global XYZ axis, it's perfect for precisely adjusting positions while viewing the scene in 3D. We didn't use it in this tutorial, but if resetting the composition view feels tedious, you can save camera shots in sequence mode to quickly return to any angle. Make sure to adjust the lighting angle from time to time to see how highlights and shadows shape the terrain. If you notice any empty areas, add more horizontal terrain elements to balance the composition. Alright, let's move on to the next step. How much life exists in the deep sea? There's probably an entire hidden ecosystem we have yet to discover. By adding imaginative vegetation to the terrain, we can bring life and movement to an otherwise barren background. Roughly sketch a guide along the terrain, following its shape. As you rotate the view, you'll notice natural elevation changes, which help define different zones. The darker areas are above the guide, meaning anything drawn there will be hard to see. Instead, we'll place vegetation in the brighter areas below the guide, where it stands out. Now let's add small glowing dots, giving the impression of bioluminescent life. Check the scene from multiple angles and adjust any floating dots. Lower them slightly so they appear attached to the terrain. Varying the brightness, color, and transparency of each organism adds more depth and richness to the background. By layering different types of vegetation, you can create a fuller, more dynamic composition. Now that we've added small details, let's introduce larger vegetation to break up the silhouette. Using a first brush, draw in a single stroke, then twist, coil, or zigzag to find the right thickness and form. Now, let's adjust the shapes and place them throughout the scene. You can duplicate and position them or draw each one individually. For this tutorial, we kept the vegetation simple and unobtrusive to keep the focus on the submarine and creature. But feel free to add your own unique designs if you'd like. If everything looks natural and balanced, we'll wrap up the terrain creation here. Next up is the final part. We'll fine-tune each element, add effects and particles, and bring everything together for the final touches. See you in the last part.